I'd be happy to help you create this 50-part story. However, I need to let you know that writing all 50 parts at 500 words each would be 25,000 words total, which is quite extensive for a single response. Let me start writing the story for you, and I'll create as many parts as possible. If we need to continue beyond what fits in one response, you can simply ask me to continue where I left off. Maya Rodriguez wiped the grease from her hands onto her worn coveralls as she stood in front of the dilapidated garage on the corner of 5th and Maple. The building looked like it had been forgotten by time itself, with peeling paint, a sagging roof, and windows so dirty they were nearly opaque. But Maya saw something different. She saw possibility. At 28 years old, Maya had spent the last decade working under other people, learning everything she could about engines, transmissions, and the intricate mechanical systems that kept vehicles running. She'd saved every penny she could, dreaming of the day she'd own her own shop. When she saw the listing for this garage, priced at just $1,000, she couldn't believe her luck. The property had been in foreclosure, abandoned by its previous owner who'd fled town owing money to half the city. The real estate agent, a sleazy man named Douglas Pemberton, had smirked when she'd shown interest. "You sure about this, honey? Place is practically falling apart. Might be better suited for a man who knows what he's doing with real estate." Maya had smiled politely, written the check, and taken the keys without another word. She'd dealt with men like Douglas her entire career. Their underestimation of her abilities had long since stopped bothering her. The paperwork had gone through surprisingly quickly. Within 2 weeks, Maya was the proud owner of her first property. She'd taken out a small loan to cover the initial repairs and equipment she'd need. Her plan was simple: fix up the garage, build a reputation for honest, quality work, and slowly grow her business. She wasn't looking to get rich quick. She just wanted independence and the respect she'd earned but rarely received. On her first official day as owner, Maya arrived at sunrise with her toolbox, a thermos of coffee, and a heart full of determination. The inside of the garage was worse than the outside. Decades of accumulated junk filled every corner: old tires, rusted car parts, oil-stained rags, and furniture that looked like it had survived multiple floods. The concrete floor was cracked and stained, and the overhead lights flickered weakly when she managed to get the electricity working. She spent the first 3 days just clearing out the garbage, hauling load after load to the dumpster she'd rented. Her back ached, her hands were blistered, and she was covered in dust and grime, but she felt more alive than she had in years. This was hers. Every square foot of this rundown building belonged to her, and she was going to transform it into something remarkable. On the fourth day, while sweeping the far corner of the garage, Maya's broom hit something that sounded different from concrete. She knelt down and brushed away years of accumulated dirt and old newspapers to reveal a metal handle set flush with the floor. Her heart began to race as she cleared more debris away from the area. The handle was attached to a heavy metal door, roughly 4 feet square, that had been concealed beneath decades of grime. Maya grabbed a crowbar from her toolbox and worked the edge around the door's perimeter, breaking the seal of rust and dirt that had kept it hidden. With considerable effort, she managed to pry the door open. A rush of cool, stale air hit her face, carrying with it the scent of earth and something else she couldn't quite identify. She peered down into the darkness below and saw the top rungs of a metal ladder descending into blackness. Maya's practical side told her to call someone, to not venture into an unknown underground space alone. But her curiosity was overwhelming. She grabbed the heavy-duty flashlight from her truck and tested the ladder's stability. It seemed solid enough, bolted firmly into the concrete walls of what appeared to be a shaft. She began her descent carefully, testing each rung before putting her full weight on it. The ladder went down approximately 15 feet before her boots touched solid ground. Maya shone her flashlight around and gasped. She was standing in a tunnel, roughly 7 feet high and 6 feet wide, with brick walls and a concrete floor. The craftsmanship was remarkable, clearly professional work, not some amateur excavation. The tunnel stretched in both directions, disappearing into darkness beyond her flashlight's reach. Maya chose to go right, moving slowly and carefully, aware that she was doing something potentially dangerous. The air was surprisingly fresh, suggesting the tunnel had ventilation somewhere. Every 20 feet or so, she noticed alcoves cut into the walls, some empty, others containing old wooden crates. She approached one of the crates and carefully pried it open with her fingers. Inside were bottles, old glass bottles with faded labels. Maya picked one up and examined it in her flashlight beam. Whiskey, dated 1931. Her breath caught in her throat. This was a Prohibition-era smuggling tunnel. The realization sent chills down her spine. Her little garage, purchased for $1,000, sat atop a piece of actual history. She continued exploring, finding more crates, old furniture, and even what appeared to be a small office area carved into the tunnel wall, complete with a desk and filing cabinet. Maya spent another hour exploring the tunnel system, discovering that it branched off in multiple directions, creating a small underground network. Some passages had collapsed, blocked by fallen bricks and earth, but the main arteries were intact. She found remnants of an old speakeasy, complete with a bar, broken stools, and dozens of empty bottles. Someone had operated a serious operation down here during the 1920s and 1930s. When she finally climbed back up to the garage, her mind was reeling. She carefully closed the metal door and sat on an overturned bucket, trying to process what she'd discovered. Part of her wanted to tell someone immediately, to share this incredible find. But another part of her, the part that had learned to be cautious in a world that often dismissed her, decided to keep quiet until she understood more. Over the next week, Maya continued her work on the garage during the day, making it presentable for customers. She replaced the overhead door, repaired the hydraulic lift, and organized her tools. But every evening after locking up, she'd descend into the tunnel system with better lights and equipment, slowly mapping out its extent. The tunnel system was more extensive than she'd initially realized. The main passage ran for nearly 200 yards before branching off. One branch led toward what she calculated was the direction of the old Riverside district. Another seemed to head toward the downtown area. All of them showed signs of heavy use decades ago, but had been abandoned and sealed off from their other endpoints. Maya began researching the history of her property and the surrounding area. She discovered that during Prohibition, this neighborhood had been notorious for bootlegging operations. Several mob figures had controlled various territories, running illegal alcohol from Canada through a network of tunnels and hidden passages. Most of these tunnels had been discovered and filled in by authorities in the 1940s and 1950s, but apparently, this one had been missed. She also learned something else interesting. The property records for her garage showed a complicated ownership history. It had changed hands multiple times over the decades, often in questionable circumstances. The most recent owner, a man named Vincent Calabrese, had disappeared 3 years ago, leaving behind debts and angry creditors. Maya's research led her to the local historical society, where she met an elderly man named Harold Winters who'd spent his entire life studying the city's Prohibition era. When she described her garage's location, his eyes lit up. He pulled out old maps and photographs, spreading them across the table. "That corner," he said, tapping a wrinkled finger on an old survey map, "was owned by the Morty family. They ran one of the biggest bootlegging operations in the state. The patriarch, Giovanni Morty, was a genius at staying one step ahead of the law. He built tunnels all over this part of the city, but when he died in 1947, the locations died with him. His sons didn't inherit his brains or his records. They squabbled over the scraps of his empire, while the feds seized everything they could find." Harold leaned back in his chair, studying Maya with sharp eyes that belied his age. "If you found an intact Morty tunnel, young lady, you found something historians have been searching for since the 1950s. The rumor was always that Giovanni hid his real fortune somewhere in those tunnels. Not just cash, mind you, but bonds, jewelry, even artwork he'd taken as payment from desperate people during the Depression. Maya felt her heart hammering. That's just a rumor, though, right? There's no evidence he actually hid anything. Harold shrugged. Giovanni Morty died wealthy, even after the government seized his known assets. His legitimate businesses, the ones he'd established as fronts, were worth millions even back then. But people who knew him swore he had another fortune hidden away. His deathbed confession to a priest supposedly included the location, but the priest honored the seal of confession. After the priest died in 1965, the secret died with him, or so everyone thought. Maya thanked Harold and left with copies of old maps and newspaper articles. Her mind raced with possibilities. She needed to be systematic about this. If there was something valuable in those tunnels, she had to be smart about how she searched, and more importantly, what she did if she found anything. For the next month, Maya lived a double life. By day, she was a mechanic building her business. She'd gotten her first few customers through word of mouth, mostly friends and former colleagues who trusted her work. The garage was slowly transforming into a functional, professional space. She'd painted the walls, installed proper lighting, and organized her equipment efficiently. By night, she was an explorer and treasure hunter. She'd invested in better lighting for the tunnels, setting up LED strips along the main passages so she could see clearly. She'd also purchased a good quality metal detector and began systematically searching every inch of accessible tunnel. The work was exhausting, but Maya was driven by a mixture of curiosity and hope. Most of what she found was mundane: old bottles, broken furniture, rusted tools. But occasionally she'd discover something interesting. A stack of old newspapers from 1932, perfectly preserved in a sealed alcove. A leather journal with entries in Italian, which she carefully photographed and planned to have translated. A small wooden box containing old photographs of men in suits standing in front of the garage when it was new. She was careful about her security. She'd installed a proper lock on the metal door leading to the tunnels and never told anyone what she was doing down there. To anyone who asked, she was just working late, sorting through decades of accumulated junk left by previous owners. Then 6 weeks after discovering the tunnels, Maya found something that changed everything. She was working in a section she'd previously thought was a dead end, a collapsed passage blocked by fallen bricks. But on closer inspection with her metal detector, she'd gotten a strong signal from behind the collapsed section. Carefully, methodically, she began removing bricks, creating a small opening. Behind the collapse was a small chamber, maybe 8 feet by 8 feet, completely intact. And stacked against the far wall were metal boxes, the kind used for storing documents in the early 20th century. Maya's hands shook as she carefully pulled the first box out. The metal box was heavy, much heavier than she'd expected if it just contained papers. Maya carefully carried it back to the main tunnel where her lighting was better. She set it down gently and examined the lock. It was old but still functional, a simple key mechanism that had rusted over the decades. Using her tools, Maya carefully worked on the lock, trying not to damage whatever might be inside. After 20 minutes of patient effort, she heard a click. The lock released. She took a deep breath and opened the lid. Inside were bundles of papers wrapped in oilcloth, a common preservation method from that era. Maya carefully unwrapped the first bundle and found herself looking at stock certificates. Dozens of them, issued by major companies in the 1920s and 1930s. Some were companies she recognized, huge corporations that still existed today. Others were names she'd never heard of, likely businesses that had failed during the Depression. The second box contained something even more interesting: bonds. War bonds, corporate bonds, municipal bonds, all carefully documented and organized. Maya's hands trembled as she looked through them. She had no idea if any of these were still valuable, but there were hundreds of them. The third box was the heaviest. When she opened it, she understood why. Gold coins, dozens of them wrapped in cloth and stacked carefully. Maya picked one up, feeling its weight in her palm. It was a $20 gold piece, dated 1924. She'd seen these before in a museum. Each one was worth far more than its face value, and she was looking at what had to be at least 50 of them. Maya sat back against the tunnel wall, overwhelmed. She'd stumbled into something enormous. These boxes alone contained what could be hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe more, and there were at least a dozen more boxes still in that hidden chamber. She made a decision. She wouldn't rush this. She'd carefully document everything she found, research its value, and figure out the legal implications before taking any action. She'd worked too hard for her garage to lose it because she got greedy or stupid. Over the next 2 months, Maya meticulously cataloged everything in the hidden chamber. She worked slowly, taking only 1 or 2 boxes at a time up to her apartment where she could examine the contents in private. She photographed everything, created detailed spreadsheets, and began the careful work of researching what she'd found. The stock certificates were complicated. Some were from companies that had gone bankrupt decades ago, worthless paper now, but others were from corporations that had survived, merged, or been acquired. Maya spent hours researching the history of each company, trying to determine if the certificates had any modern value. The bonds were easier to research but harder to value. Many had matured decades ago, but some had clauses about interest accrual and successor obligations. Maya realized she was going to need expert help, but she was terrified of bringing anyone else into this. How could she trust that they wouldn't try to take what she'd found or report it to authorities who might claim it for the state? The gold coins were the most straightforward. Each $20 gold piece was worth approximately $1,500 based on current gold prices and numismatic value. She had 63 of them. Just the coins alone represented nearly $100,000. But the most intriguing discovery came from a leather-bound ledger she found in one of the boxes. It was Giovanni Morti's personal record book, written in a mixture of English and Italian. Maya had portions of it translated and discovered it was a detailed accounting of his operations, including records of money lent, debts owed, and assets hidden. One entry, dated March 1933, caught her attention. It was written in English and said simply, "Primary reserve relocated to the foundation. Secondary reserve distributed among the 5 points. Emergency reserve remains in the original location. Total value, $2,400,000. Maya stared at that number. $2,400,000 in 1933 would be worth an astronomical amount today, adjusting for inflation. That would be somewhere in the neighborhood of $40 to $50 million in modern currency. Maya knew she was in over her head. What she'd found wasn't just a few old boxes of valuables. This was potentially a major historical discovery with enormous financial implications. She needed help, but she had to be smart about who she brought into this. She decided to start with a lawyer, not one of the big firms downtown, but someone she could trust to keep things confidential. She asked around carefully and was referred to Patricia Vaughn, a solo practitioner who specialized in estate law and property disputes. Patricia had a reputation for being thorough, honest, and discreet. Maya made an appointment and met Patricia at her modest office. The lawyer was in her late 50s, with gray hair pulled back in a practical bun and sharp, intelligent eyes behind rectangular glasses. Maya liked her immediately. "I've found something on my property," Maya began carefully. "Something valuable that belonged to previous owners. I need to understand the legal implications before I do anything else." Patricia pulled out a legal pad and pen. "Tell me everything, and remember, this consultation is protected by attorney-client privilege. Nothing you tell me leaves this room unless you authorize it." Maya told her the whole story, from buying the garage to discovering the tunnels and the hidden chamber. She showed Patricia photographs of the documents, the gold coins, and pages from the ledger. Patricia listened without interrupting, taking notes occasionally. When Maya finished, Patricia sat back in her chair and let out a long breath. Ms. Rodriguez, what you found is legally complex. The good news is that under property law in this state, you have a strong claim to anything found on your property, especially items that were clearly hidden or abandoned by previous owners. The bad news is that there are multiple parties who could potentially contest that claim. Who? Maya asked, though she had a sinking feeling she already knew. Patricia counted on her fingers. The descendants of Giovanni Morty, if any exist and can prove ownership. The federal government, which seized Morty's assets in the 1940s and could argue these are part of that seizure. The state, which could claim the items as abandoned property. And finally, the previous owner of your garage, Vincent Calabrese, who might argue he owned the property when these items were last accessible. Maya felt her hopes deflating. So what should I do? Patricia tapped her pen on the desk thoughtfully. First, we need to establish the legal status of everything you found. I'll need to research the history of seizures related to Giovanni Morty, look into what happened to his estate, and track down whether he has any living heirs. I'll also need to investigate Vincent Calabrese's disappearance and determine if he has any legal claim. How long will that take? Maya asked. A few weeks at least. In the meantime, I strongly advise you to secure everything you found, document it thoroughly, and don't tell anyone else about this. The moment word gets out, this becomes exponentially more complicated. Maya nodded. What about the value of what I found? I need to know what we're dealing with. Patricia pulled out her phone and made a call. I know someone who can help with that. Marcus Chen is a certified appraiser who specializes in historical documents and collectibles. He's trustworthy, and I've worked with him before. With your permission, I'd like to bring him in to evaluate what you found. Over the next week, Maya worked with both Patricia and Marcus. The appraiser spent hours examining the documents, coins, and other items she'd brought up from the tunnels. His preliminary assessment was staggering. Just the items from the boxes she'd already opened were worth approximately $300,000. The gold coins, the mature bonds that still had value, and several of the stock certificates from companies that still existed all contributed to that total. But this ledger, Marcus said, holding Giovanni's record book carefully, this is the real treasure map. If even a fraction of what he recorded actually exists and you can find it, we're talking about millions of dollars. Maya felt dizzy. She'd bought a garage for $1,000 and stumbled into a fortune. But she also understood that with this discovery came enormous complications. People had killed for far less money. She needed to be very, very careful about her next steps. Patricia's research took 3 weeks and revealed a complex web of legal history. Giovanni Morty had died without leaving a will, and his estate had been fought over by his 3 sons. The federal government had seized most of his known assets, but the legal battles had dragged on for years. Eventually, the remaining Morty family members had scattered, and the government had closed its investigation, satisfied it had recovered what it could. Here's the interesting part, Patricia explained during their next meeting. The government's seizure warrant was very specific about what it covered: properties, vehicles, bank accounts, and business assets that were documented. Nothing in the records mentions any search of underground tunnels or hidden reserves. They either didn't know about them or couldn't find them. What about Morty's descendants? Maya asked. I found 2 living relatives. Giovanni's grandson, Anthony Morty, lives in Florida. He's in his 70s and, according to my investigation, has no idea about any hidden family fortune. Giovanni's great-granddaughter, Lisa Morty Harrison, lives in California. She's a school teacher. Neither of them has shown any interest in their ancestors' criminal past. And Vincent Calabrese. Patricia's expression darkened. That's where things get interesting. Calabrese didn't just disappear. According to police reports I accessed, he's wanted for questioning in connection with several fraudulent real estate deals. He bought your garage property through a shell company, used it as collateral for loans, and then vanished before those loans came due. The property ended up in foreclosure, which is how you were able to buy it so cheap. So he might come back and claim what I found. Maya felt a chill. He could try, but his legal standing would be weak. He never actually paid off the property, abandoned it, and is currently a fugitive. Any court would be unlikely to award him anything. However, Patricia paused, that doesn't mean he won't be a problem if he finds out about this. Maya understood the implication. Calabrese might not have a legal claim, but he could make her life dangerous if he thought she'd found something valuable on what he considered his property. They decided on a strategy. Patricia would file a quiet claim with the state, declaring the discovery of historical artifacts on Maya's property and requesting a formal determination of ownership. This would establish a legal record and protect Maya's interests, but it would also alert others to what had been found. Once we file this, the clock starts ticking, Patricia warned. We'll have maybe a week before the media gets wind of it, and then this becomes a circus. Are you prepared for that? Maya thought about her quiet life, her small garage business, her dream of independence. All of that was about to be blown apart. But she didn't have a choice. She couldn't hide this forever, and if she tried, someone else might discover it or she might face legal trouble for concealing it. Do it, she said. The filing was made on a Thursday morning. By Friday afternoon, a reporter from the local newspaper had somehow gotten wind of it and called Maya's garage. She refused to comment. By Saturday, the story had broken. Local mechanic discovers Prohibition-era treasure trove, read the headline. Maya's phone started ringing constantly. Reporters, treasure hunters, historians, and curiosity seekers all wanted to know more. She stopped answering her phone and put a "closed for private business" sign on her garage. Patricia had advised her to maintain absolute silence until they had a clearer picture of the legal situation. Then on Monday morning, Maya arrived at her garage to find a man waiting for her. He was in his 60s, well-dressed in an expensive suit, with silver hair and cold blue eyes. He smiled when he saw her, but it didn't reach those eyes. "Ms. Rodriguez, my name is Richard Pemberton. I represent the Pemberton Family Trust. I believe we need to have a conversation about your recent discovery." Maya's blood ran cold. She recognized the last name. Douglas Pemberton, the sleazy real estate agent who'd sold her the garage, had mentioned his family had deep roots in the city. Now his relative was standing in front of her garage, looking like he owned the place. "I don't have anything to say to you," Maya said, moving to unlock her garage door. "If you have legal business, contact my attorney." Richard Pemberton didn't move, blocking her path subtly. "I think you'll want to hear what I have to say. You see, my family has owned properties in this neighborhood for 3 generations. That garage you bought, my grandfather sold it to Giovanni Morti in 1925. When Morti's empire collapsed, it should have reverted to our family, but there were legal complications. Various people claimed ownership over the years, but we've maintained an interest." "That's your problem, not mine," Maya said firmly. "I bought this property legally. The title was clear. Whatever interest your family thinks it has, take it up with the courts." Pemberton's smile turned cold. "You don't understand how things work, Ms. Rodriguez. My family has influence in this city. Judges, politicians, business owners, we know them all. If we decide to make your life difficult, we can. Or," his voice turned smooth, "we could come to an arrangement. We recognize you made the discovery. We're willing to offer you a finder's fee. 20% of whatever is recovered. That's generous, considering you have no real claim to the Morti fortune." Maya felt anger rising in her chest. This was exactly the kind of bullying she'd faced her entire career. Men in positions of power, used to getting their way, trying to intimidate her into giving up what was rightfully hers. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said coldly. "I found some old bottles and junk in my property. If that's worth something to historians, fine. But I'm not making any deals with you. Now get off my property before I call the police." Pemberton's facade of friendliness dropped entirely. "You're making a mistake. Think very carefully about what you're doing. My family doesn't lose, Ms. Rodriguez. One way or another, we get what we want." He turned and walked away, climbing into a black Mercedes parked down the street. Maya's hands shook as she unlocked her garage door. She immediately called Patricia. "The Pembertons," Patricia said grimly when Maya told her about the encounter. "I should have seen this coming. They're one of the old money families in this city, and they've got their fingers in everything. Richard Pemberton is particularly notorious. He's been involved in several controversial property deals over the years, always managing to stay just on the right side of legal." "Can they really take this from me?" Maya asked. "Not legally, not if we play this right. But they can make things very difficult. They might challenge your property title, tie us up in court for years, or try to claim that the tunnel system extends beyond your property line into land they own. The fact that Richard approached you directly with threats is actually good for us. It shows their legal position is weak, so they're trying intimidation." "What do I do?" "Document everything. If he or anyone associated with the Pembertons contacts you again, record it if possible and definitely write down everything they say. We need to build a case that they're harassing you. In the meantime, I'm going to accelerate our claim process. The faster we get official recognition of your ownership rights, the harder it will be for them to interfere." Over the next few days, the situation intensified. The story about Maya's discovery had gone viral locally, then regionally, then nationally. News crews showed up at her garage. She had to hire a security guard just to keep people from trespassing. Her business had ground to a complete halt. Then the letters started arriving. First from the Pemberton Family Trust's lawyers, claiming ownership interest in the property and demanding access to assess the discovery. Then from a law firm representing the city, suggesting the tunnels might be municipal property. Then from a group claiming to represent Giovanni Morti's descendants, though Patricia had confirmed these weren't the legitimate heirs she'd found. "Vultures," Patricia said, sorting through the letters in her office. "Everyone wants a piece of this now, but most of these claims are baseless. We just need to stay strong and follow the process." The State Historical Commission scheduled a meeting to assess the discovery and make a preliminary ruling on ownership. Maya, Patricia, and Marcus, the appraiser, attended, along with representatives from multiple interested parties. The conference room was packed. Richard Pemberton was there with 3 lawyers. The city sent 2 attorneys and a historian. A man claiming to be Giovanni Morti's great-grandson sat with his lawyer, though Patricia had already confirmed he was a fraud. Various treasure hunters and historical societies had sent observers. The commission chair, a stern woman named Dr. Elizabeth Porter, called the meeting to order. "We're here to make a preliminary determination about the artifacts discovered on property owned by Ms. Maya Rodriguez. Ms. Rodriguez, would you present your case?" Maya stood, her heart pounding. She dressed carefully in a professional outfit, wanting to be taken seriously. "Thank you. I purchased the property at 523 Fifth Street legally and in good faith. The discovery was made during routine cleaning of the property I own. Under state law, I have a right to anything found on my property that was clearly abandoned by previous owners. I've been cooperating fully with authorities and have documented everything carefully." Richard Pemberton's lead attorney, a shark-like man named Gregory Walsh, stood next. "The Pemberton Family Trust contests this claim. Our research shows that the tunnel system extends beyond Ms. Rodriguez's property line into land owned by the trust. Furthermore, the trust has a historical claim to the Morti assets, as Giovanni Morti purchased the original property from the Pemberton family and defaulted on that purchase." Patricia rose smoothly. "That's simply false. We've had the property surveyed, and the entire tunnel system, from end to end, falls within Ms. Rodriguez's property boundaries. As for the historical claim, Giovanni Morti purchased that property in 1925 with a clear title. Any default occurred decades ago and was settled through the foreclosure process. The Pemberton family had over 70 years to assert their claim and never did. They only became interested when my client made a valuable discovery. The argument went on for hours. Each party presented their case and the commission members asked detailed questions. Maya watched as people argued over what she'd found, what she owned, what she deserved. It was exhausting and frustrating. Finally, Dr. Porter called for a recess. The commission will review all materials presented and issue a preliminary ruling within 30 days. In the meantime, Ms. Rodriguez, you are ordered to secure the site and allow no further excavation until we've made our determination. All artifacts already removed must be properly stored and documented. As people filed out of the conference room, Richard Pemberton approached Maya. Last chance, Ms. Rodriguez. Take the 20%. Once this gets to court, the legal fees alone will bankrupt you. Patricia stepped between them. Mr. Pemberton, any further communication with my client needs to go through me. This borders on harassment. Pemberton sneered. You're out of your depth, Patricia. My family owns this city. Your little solo practice can't stand up to our resources. Try me, Patricia said coldly. That night, Maya sat in her apartment above the garage, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on her. Her simple dream of owning a business had turned into a nightmare of legal battles and threats. She'd found a fortune, but she couldn't access any of it, and people were trying to steal it from under her. Her phone rang, unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Ms. Rodriguez. The voice was elderly male with a slight Italian accent. My name is Anthony Morty. I believe you found something that belonged to my grandfather. Maya's heart sank. Another claimant. Mr. Morty, you need to contact my lawyer. Please just listen for a moment. I'm not trying to take anything from you. I'm calling because I think I can help you. My grandfather left something behind that might resolve all of this. Can we meet? Against Patricia's advice, Maya agreed to meet Anthony Morty at a coffee shop the next day. She brought Patricia with her, just in case. The old man who was waiting for them looked nothing like the mob boss grandfather he descended from. He was thin, wore thick glasses, and had the gentle demeanor of a retired schoolteacher. Thank you for meeting me, he said as they sat down. I know you must be suspicious, but I promise I'm not here to cause trouble. When I heard about your discovery, I realized it was finally time to share something my grandfather told me before he died. He pulled out an old leather wallet, worn and creased with age. From it, he extracted a yellowed piece of paper, folded many times. My grandfather gave this to my father in 1947, the week before he died. My father never knew what to do with it, so he gave it to me when he passed in 1982. I never pursued it because I wanted nothing to do with my grandfather's criminal past. I built my own life, far away from all of that. Anthony carefully unfolded the paper. It was a letter, written in Italian in shaky handwriting. This is my grandfather's confession and final will. He wrote it when he knew he was dying, giving instructions about his hidden fortune. He wanted it to go to specific charities to make amends for his crimes. But he died before he could formalize it legally, and the family was too busy fighting over scraps to care about his wishes. Patricia leaned forward. Why are you sharing this now? Anthony smiled sadly. Because I'm 76 years old and I don't want to die with this burden. My grandfather was a criminal, but he wasn't entirely heartless. At the end, he wanted to do some good. If Ms. Rodriguez has found his fortune, perhaps she can help fulfill his final wishes. Maya took the letter, though she couldn't read Italian. What does it say? Anthony pulled out a typed translation. I had this done years ago. Essentially, my grandfather confesses to his crimes and states that he hid his reserve fortune in 3 locations. The primary reserve is in the foundation of the first house, which I believe means your garage, the first property he bought in the city. Maya felt chills run down her spine. The foundation. I found a hidden chamber with boxes of documents and gold. Could there be more? Anthony consulted the letter. He mentions the primary reserve contains the papers of power and the gold of insurance. That sounds like what you found. But he also writes about the heart of the operation, which contains the true wealth that cannot be measured in mere currency. What does that mean? Maya asked. I don't know. My grandfather had a poetic streak, but he goes on to list the charities he wanted his fortune to go to. Orphanages, hospitals, churches. He wanted to fund them anonymously to help the people he'd hurt during his criminal years. Patricia studied the letter carefully. This is interesting, but it's not a legal will. It was never properly executed or witnessed. However, it could be powerful evidence of Giovanni's intent. If we can prove this is authentic, it might help establish that he meant to donate his fortune, which would complicate any claims by people trying to seize it for themselves. Anthony nodded. I'll testify to its authenticity. I watched my grandfather write it. I know it's his handwriting. And if it helps Ms. Rodriguez keep what she found from people like the Pembertons, then my grandfather's final wish will be fulfilled in a way. Over the next week, Patricia worked with Anthony and several handwriting experts to authenticate the letter. The Historical Commission was informed about this new evidence. Meanwhile, Maya returned to her garage, thinking about the phrase, the heart of the operation. She descended into the tunnels with renewed purpose, studying the layout with fresh eyes. The hidden chamber where she'd found the boxes was clearly important, but it didn't feel like the heart of anything. It was tucked away, hidden, a backup location. If Giovanni Morty had a heart to his operation, where would it be? Maya spent hours studying the tunnel layout, comparing it to the old maps Harold Winters had given her. Most of the tunnels seemed designed for transportation, for moving goods and people. But there was one area that didn't quite fit the pattern. A section where the main tunnel widened into what looked like it had once been a larger space before partially collapsing. She approached the collapsed area carefully, examining it with her flashlight and metal detector. The detector went crazy with readings. Something large and metallic was behind that wall of fallen bricks. This time, Maya called in help. She hired a structural engineer to assess the collapsed section and determine if it could be safely excavated. The engineer, a cautious man named James Lynn, spent 2 days examining the tunnel structure. It's risky, he finally reported. This collapse happened decades ago, and the surrounding structure has stabilized around it. If we remove the debris, we might trigger another collapse. But if you want to try, I can design a support system that should keep everything safe. Maya made the decision to proceed. With James supervising, she hired a small crew of contractors she trusted, people she'd worked with before who knew how to keep their mouths shut. They installed steel supports and carefully began removing debris from the collapsed section. It took 3 days of careful work, but finally they broke through. Maya squeezed through the opening first, her flashlight cutting through decades of undisturbed darkness. What she saw took her breath away. It was a room approximately 20 feet square with brick walls and a concrete floor. But unlike the rough construction of the tunnels, this room had been finished with care. The walls were plastered and painted, though the paint had peeled with age. In the center of the room stood a large metal safe, roughly 6 feet tall and 4 feet wide. It was a beautiful piece of craftsmanship, with ornate detailing on its door. But what made Maya gasp was what surrounded the safe. The walls were covered with paintings, dozens of them, hanging in neat rows. And around the perimeter of the room were wooden crates and boxes, all carefully stacked and organized. Maya stepped further into the room, her flashlight playing across the paintings. Even with her limited knowledge of art, she could tell these were significant works. The style, the craftsmanship, the subjects, all spoke of quality and age. One appeared to be a portrait of a woman in early 20th century dress. Another showed a landscape that could have been the Italian countryside. A third was abstract, with bold colors and geometric shapes. James Lynn squeezed through the opening behind her. "Good Lord," he whispered, "what is all this?" "The heart of the operation," Maya said softly. "This is what Giovanni Morty valued most." She approached the large safe carefully, examining it without touching. It was a masterpiece of locksmithing from the 1920s or 1930s, with multiple locking mechanisms visible on its face. Cracking it would require a specialist. The crates around the room were marked with symbols and numbers. Maya photographed everything before touching anything. Then carefully she pried open the nearest crate. Inside, wrapped in cloth, were books. Rare books by the look of them, leather-bound volumes with gilt edges. She gently pulled one out and opened it. The title page identified it as a first edition of The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, published in 1925. The next crate contained sculptures, small bronze pieces carefully packed in straw. Another held what appeared to be antique jewelry, though Maya couldn't determine if the gems were real. A fourth contained more documents, these in Italian, carefully preserved in oilcloth. "This isn't just treasure," James said, his voice filled with awe. "This is a collection. Someone put this together deliberately, carefully. This was personal, not just about money." Maya understood. Giovanni Morty hadn't just been a criminal hoarding wealth. He'd been a collector, a man who appreciated beauty and culture. This room represented his true passion, the things he couldn't bear to part with even when he had to hide everything else. Maya called Patricia and Marcus immediately. The next day, they descended into the tunnel with a team of experts, an art historian, a rare book specialist, and a professional safe cracker. What followed was the most exciting and exhausting week of Maya's life. The art historian, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, spent hours examining each painting. Her preliminary assessment was stunning. Several of these are significant works by recognized artists from the 1920s and 1930s. This landscape appears to be a genuine Pissarro. This portrait could be a Sargent, though I'll need to verify. If these are authentic and not copies, we're looking at millions of dollars in art. The rare book specialist, Michael Tors, was equally impressed. First edition, signed copies, rare printings. This collection was assembled by someone who knew what they were doing. Just the Fitzgerald alone is worth $50,000 to $70,000. And this, he held up another volume carefully, appears to be a first edition, First State of Ulysses by James Joyce. If it's genuine, this is one of the most valuable books in existence. The safe cracker, an elderly man named Dominic who'd come out of retirement for this job, spent 2 full days working on the massive safe. This is a Mosler from the 1920s, one of the finest ever made. The craftsmanship is extraordinary. Your Mr. Morty spared no expense. Finally, with a series of clicks and the groan of metal that hadn't moved in decades, the safe door swung open. Inside were more carefully organized shelves and compartments. The top shelf held jewelry, pieces that made even Maya's untrained eye recognize their value. Diamonds, emeralds, rubies, all set in platinum and gold settings from the Art Deco era. The middle shelves contained more documents, deeds, stock certificates, bonds, all carefully cataloged and preserved. Giovanni Morty had been meticulous in his record-keeping. The bottom compartments held cash, bundles of old bills wrapped in paper bands, 20s, 50s, and hundreds from the 1930s and 1940s. Marcus worked with the other experts to create a preliminary inventory. The total value of everything in the room was staggering. The paintings alone, if authenticated, were worth approximately $8 million. The rare books added another million. The jewelry, pending proper appraisal, was estimated at $3 to $5 million. The cash, while no longer legal tender, had significant value to collectors, roughly twice its face value. The documents were harder to value, but Marcus estimated that the stocks, bonds, and other papers could add several more million, especially if any of the corporate entities still existed in some form. "We're looking at somewhere between $15 and $20 million," Marcus told Maya and Patricia. And that's a conservative estimate. Some of these items could go for much more at auction if they're properly authenticated and marketed. Maya sat down on a crate, overwhelmed. She'd gone from being a mechanic struggling to start a business to potentially being worth millions. It didn't feel real. Patricia placed a hand on her shoulder. This is life-changing money, Maya, but we need to be very careful about how we proceed. The moment word of this gets out, every vulture in the state will be circling. We need to secure everything, get proper authentication, and most importantly, we need to settle the legal ownership before anyone can access any of this. That night, after everyone had left and the secret room was secured with new locks, Maya descended into the tunnel alone. She sat in the room, surrounded by Giovanni Morti's treasures, and thought about Anthony's letter. The old gangster had wanted his fortune to go to charity, to help people, to make amends for his crimes. Maya had been raised by a single mother who'd struggled every day to keep food on the table. She knew what it was like to need help and not get it. She also knew the value of second chances. She made a decision. If she won the legal battle for this fortune, she would honor Giovanni's wishes, at least in part. She'd keep enough to secure her future and grow her business, but the rest would go to help people who needed it. The discovery of the secret room couldn't be kept quiet. Within days, the media had the story, and it went international. Mechanic discovers $20 million Prohibition-era treasure, read headlines around the world. Maya's garage was besieged by reporters, curiosity seekers, and people claiming to have some connection to Giovanni Morti or the property. The legal situation became even more complex. Richard Pemberton doubled down on his family's claim, producing historical documents suggesting the tunnels extended into property his family had once owned. The city tried to claim the artworks as abandoned property. A group of alleged Morty descendants filed a lawsuit, though Patricia quickly proved they were frauds hopping for a payday. The State Historical Commission scheduled another hearing, this one much larger and more formal. The conference room was packed with lawyers, experts, historians, and media representatives. Dr. Porter called for order. This hearing will determine the preliminary ownership of the artifacts discovered on property owned by Ms. Maya Rodriguez. We've reviewed all submitted claims and evidence. Ms. Rodriguez, does your position remain the same? Maya stood, her voice steady despite her nerves. Yes, I purchased my property legally. Everything I found was on my property, hidden and abandoned. Under state law, I have a clear right to these items. I've been cooperative with all investigations and have maintained the security and preservation of everything found. Gregory Walsh, representing the Pembertons, stood next. The Pemberton Family Trust maintains that the tunnel system extends beyond Ms. Rodriguez's property line. We've commissioned our own survey that shows at least one branch of the tunnel system extends 15 feet into property historically owned by the trust. Patricia rose smoothly. The trust survey is flawed. They measured from current property lines, but historical records show those lines shifted in 1952 when the city reconfigured this neighborhood. We've commissioned a historical survey using the original deeds, and it confirms that all tunnels, including the branch in question, fall within Ms. Rodriguez's property boundaries. I have certified surveyor reports to submit to the commission. The hearing lasted 3 days. Expert after expert testified. Historians presented evidence about Giovanni Morti's operations and property ownership. Surveyors debated property lines and historical boundaries. Lawyers argued about abandonment, property rights, and historical seizure laws. On the 3rd day, Dr. Porter finally called for a close to testimony. The commission will now deliberate. However, given the complexity of this case and the value of the items in question, we are recommending that this matter be resolved through the state court system. We will issue our preliminary findings, but final determination of ownership should be made by a judge. It was both victory and frustration. The commission wasn't going to rule against Maya, but they weren't going to definitively rule for her either. The battle would continue in court, which meant more time, more money, and more stress. As they left the hearing, Patricia pulled Maya aside. "This is actually good for us. The commission's refusal to rule against you is essentially a validation of your claim. When we get to court, we'll have their findings supporting us. But you need to prepare yourself for a long fight. The Pembertons have deep pockets, and they're not going to give up easily." That night, Maya returned to her garage to find someone waiting in the shadows. Her security guard had gone home for the evening, and she was alone. A figure stepped into the light, and Maya's hand went to her phone, ready to call 911. "Relax, Ms. Rodriguez." The man raised his hands in a placating gesture. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to warn you." As he stepped fully into the light, Maya recognized him from news photos. Vincent Calabrese, the previous owner of her garage, the man who disappeared 3 years ago. He looked older than his pictures, worn down by years of running. "You need to be very careful," Calabrese said. "You think the Pembertons are your biggest problem. They're nothing compared to what's really going on. There's a reason I ran, and it's the same reason you're in danger now." Maya kept her phone in her hand, ready to call for help, but curiosity made her listen. "What are you talking about?" Calabrese looked around nervously. Giovanni Morty didn't just steal from other criminals. Some of what he took belonged to people whose descendants are very much alive and very much still in the business, if you understand what I mean. When I bought that garage, I didn't know about the tunnels, but someone else did. They came to me 3 years ago, told me they had a claim on whatever was hidden there. They wanted me to help them get to it. "Who?" Maya asked. "I don't know their real names. They were professionals, organized crime, the kind of people who make problems disappear permanently. I ran because I realized they were going to use me and then make sure I couldn't talk. When the property went into foreclosure, I thought maybe they'd give up. But now you've found everything and they're going to come for it. The Pembertons, the lawyers, the legal system, none of that matters to these people." Maya felt ice in her stomach. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm tired of running and because you deserve a warning. I've been following the news about your discovery. Some of those items in that safe, particularly the jewelry, belong to families that Morty stole from during the Prohibition Wars. Mob families, Ms. Rodriguez, and some of those families still exist. They're going to want their heritage back, and they won't ask nicely." Before Maya could respond, Calabrese melted back into the shadows. She heard a car start and drive away. She immediately called Patricia and told her everything. Patricia was silent for a long moment. "This complicates things significantly. If what Calabrese says is true, we're dealing with more than just legal battles. You need protection, real protection. I'm going to contact the FBI. They have a task force that deals with organized crime and stolen property. If there are credible threats, they need to know." Over the next few days, Maya's life became even more surreal. FBI agents interviewed her, assessed the situation, and began their own investigation into the items she'd found. They confirmed that several pieces of jewelry matched descriptions of items stolen during Prohibition-era mob conflicts. Special Agent Robert Crane became Maya's primary contact. He was a serious man in his 40s who'd spent 20 years tracking organized crime. "Ms. Rodriguez, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. 3 of the jewelry pieces you found have been on our historical stolen property list for decades. They belong to the Castellano family, a crime organization that was powerful in the 1930s. The current generation is much more legitimate on the surface, but they still have connections to organized crime. If they learn you have these pieces, they may try to recover them." "What do I do?" Maya asked. "First, you let us take possession of those specific pieces as evidence. If the Castellanos make a move, we want to be able to prosecute. Second, you take security seriously. I'm arranging for protective surveillance. And third, you consider cooperating with us fully. We've been trying to map the old Prohibition-era criminal networks for years. What you found could help us close several cold cases." Maya agreed to cooperate. The FBI took possession of several items as evidence, including the Castellano jewelry and some documents that referenced criminal activities. In exchange, Agent Crane assigned a protective detail to watch her garage and apartment. The legal battle continued in court. Patricia filed a comprehensive claim, supported by the Historical Commission's findings, Anthony Morty's testimony about his grandfather's letter, and expert opinions on abandonment and property law. The Pembertons countered with their own experts and claims. But then something unexpected happened. Richard Pemberton made a mistake. He approached one of Maya's former customers, a woman named Jennifer Hayes who was friendly with Maya, and tried to get her to sign an affidavit claiming Maya had told her about finding the tunnels before she'd purchased the property. This would suggest Maya had prior knowledge and had purchased the property under false pretenses. Jennifer recorded the conversation and brought it to Maya. In the recording, Pemberton offered her $5,000 to sign the false affidavit. It was clear evidence of witness tampering and fraud. Patricia immediately filed the recording with the court and notified the State Bar Association. The judge in their case, Justice Margaret Thornton, was not pleased. She called an emergency hearing and demanded Richard Pemberton appear before her. "Mr. Pemberton," Justice Thornton said, her voice cold with fury, "I have reviewed the evidence submitted by Ms. Rodriguez's attorney. This appears to be clear witness tampering. Do you deny attempting to suborn perjury?" Richard Pemberton's lawyer tried to speak, but the judge cut him off. "I'm not asking you, counselor. I'm asking Mr. Pemberton directly. Did you offer Ms. Hayes money to sign a false statement?" Pemberton's face was red. "I was simply trying to gather evidence for our case." By creating false evidence, Justice Thornton's glare could have melted steel. "Mr. Pemberton, you have compromised not only your family's case but potentially your freedom. I am referring this matter to the district attorney for possible criminal charges. Furthermore, I am issuing a preliminary ruling in this case. Based on the evidence presented, including the clear bad faith shown by the Pemberton Family Trust, I find that Ms. Maya Rodriguez has superior claim to all items discovered on her property." Maya felt tears spring to her eyes. Patricia squeezed her hand under the table. "This ruling is preliminary and subject to appeals," the judge continued. "However, Ms. Rodriguez is hereby authorized to take possession of and dispose of the discovered items as she sees fit, subject to the ongoing FBI investigation and any legitimate claims from proven victims of theft." Court dismissed. The courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed for the doors. Richard Pemberton sat stunned, his lawyers frantically conferring. Maya and Patricia simply held each other, hardly believing what had just happened. Outside the courthouse, Maya faced a wall of cameras and microphones. Patricia whispered, "You don't have to say anything." But Maya stepped forward. "I want to make a brief statement. When I bought my garage for $1,000, I was just trying to achieve a dream of owning my own business. What I found underneath has been overwhelming and at times frightening. But throughout this process, I've learned about Giovanni Morty and his final wishes. With the court's permission and the FBI's cooperation, I plan to honor those wishes. I will be establishing the Morty Rodriguez Foundation, dedicated to helping underprivileged youth learn trades and start businesses. A portion of the discovered fortune will fund scholarships, training programs, and small business loans for people who, like me, just need a chance. The historical items will be offered to museums so everyone can learn from this piece of history. And I will finally be able to get back to my original dream, running my garage and fixing cars." The questions from reporters were deafening, but Patricia guided Maya away. They returned to the garage, where Maya's friends and supporters had gathered. Her old mentor, Tom Parker, pulled her into a hug. "I knew you'd do something special, kid. I'm proud of you." But the celebration was short-lived. That night, as Maya was closing up the garage, A black SUV pulled up. 3 men in expensive suits got out. The one in front was older, maybe 60, with silver hair and the bearing of someone used to command. "Ms. Rodriguez, my name is Anthony Castellano. I believe you have something that belongs to my family." Maya's security guard stepped forward, but she waved him back. Agent Crane had told her this might happen. She'd prepared for it. "Mr. Castellano, the FBI has already taken possession of the jewelry that belonged to your family. If you have a legitimate claim, you can file it with them." Castellano smiled, but it was cold. "The FBI took 3 pieces. According to my family's records, Giovanni Morty stole 7 pieces from my grandfather. Where are the other 4? Maya's heart sank. There had been other jewelry pieces in the safe, pieces she hadn't specifically identified. "Everything I found has been documented and is in secure storage. If you have evidence of ownership, present it to the authorities." "My family doesn't deal with authorities, Ms. Rodriguez. We handle our business directly." Castellano stepped closer. "Those pieces are our heritage. They're priceless to us, not because of their monetary value, but because they belong to our grandmother. My grandfather gave them to her, and Morty took them during a raid in 1933. We want them back." Maya stood her ground, though her heart was pounding. "I understand they have sentimental value, Mr. Castellano, but I can't just hand over valuable property without legal process. Work with the FBI. If you can prove ownership, I'm willing to return family heirlooms." Castellano studied her for a long moment. "You're braver than you look, Ms. Rodriguez, or more foolish. My family doesn't like dealing with FBI, but perhaps in this case we make exception. I will submit our evidence. But understand this, those pieces will be returned to my family, one way or another." He turned and left, his men following. Maya's security guard immediately called Agent Crane, who arrived within 20 minutes. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," Crane said. "The Castellanos are nominally legitimate now, but they have a long memory and a short temper. If they believe you're keeping family heirlooms from them, they might escalate." "What can I do?" Maya asked. "Let me work with them. If their claim is legitimate, returning family pieces might actually help us. The Castellanos have information about other Prohibition-era crimes. If we can build a relationship, if we can show we're willing to return stolen property to families, even families with criminal pasts, we might get cooperation that helps us close old cases." Over the next few weeks, Agent Crane negotiated with the Castellanos. Their claim was legitimate. They produced photographs, documentation, and testimony from elderly family members who remembered the jewelry. 4 pieces from Maya's discovery matched their descriptions. Maya met with Anthony Castellano again, this time in a neutral location with FBI agents present. "Mr. Castellano, I've reviewed your family's evidence. These pieces belong to your grandmother. They should be returned to your family." Castellano seemed surprised. "You're willing to give them up just like that?" "They're not mine to keep," Maya said simply. "Giovanni Morty stole them. Keeping stolen property doesn't become right just because time passes. Your grandmother deserves to have her jewelry returned to her family, even if she's no longer alive to wear it." Something shifted in Castellano's expression. "You're different than I expected, Ms. Rodriguez. Most people, they find treasure, they want to keep everything. My family, we understand honor, tradition. You show respect for these things." He reached into his pocket and pulled out an old photograph. "This is my grandmother wearing those pieces, 1932, 1 year before Morty took them. She died never knowing what happened to her jewelry. My grandfather searched for years. It broke his heart that he failed her." Maya looked at the photograph. The woman in it was beautiful, elegant, wearing the jewelry with pride. "I'm sorry for your family's loss. I'm glad these pieces can finally go home." Castellano stood and extended his hand. Maya shook it. "You have done my family a service. The Castellanos remember such things. If you ever need help, you have friends you didn't know you had. The return of the Castellano jewelry became national news. It showed Maya's integrity and helped shift public perception even further in her favor. The Pembertons, facing potential criminal charges and public ridicule, quietly withdrew their lawsuit. Other questionable claimants also backed off, not wanting to be seen as greedy in contrast to Maya's generosity. 3 months after the court's preliminary ruling, Justice Thornton issued her final decision. Maya Rodriguez was the legal owner of all items discovered on her property, with the exception of proven stolen property like the Castellano jewelry. She was free to dispose of the fortune as she saw fit. The day the ruling came down, Maya held a press conference at her garage, which had been renovated and expanded. "I'm announcing the establishment of the Morty Rodriguez Foundation with an initial endowment of $10 million. The foundation will provide scholarships and training programs for young people interested in learning trades. We'll also offer small business loans and mentorship for aspiring entrepreneurs." She continued, "The historical items, including the paintings and rare books, will be donated to various museums. I want everyone to be able to learn from this incredible piece of history, and I will be keeping enough of the fortune to secure my future, expand my garage, and yes, finally take a vacation." The crowd laughed and applauded. Tom Parker wiped tears from his eyes. Patricia stood beside Maya, beaming with pride. Agent Crane nodded approvingly from the back of the crowd. Even Anthony Morty had come, flying in from Florida to see how his grandfather's fortune would be used. "My grandfather was a criminal," Anthony said when Maya invited him to speak. "He hurt people, broke laws, caused pain, but at the end of his life he wanted to make amends. Today, thanks to Ms. Rodriguez's integrity and generosity, his final wish is being fulfilled. The Morty name can finally be associated with something positive." Over the next year, Maya's life transformed. Her garage became one of the most successful in the city. She hired other young mechanics, particularly women, and trained them. She became a mentor, using her experience to help others avoid the discrimination and obstacles she'd faced. The foundation flourished. Its first year, it provided scholarships to 50 young people and helped launch 12 small businesses. Maya was involved in every decision, determined that the money would be used wisely and actually help people. She also finally took that vacation, traveling to Italy to see the places Giovanni Morty had come from. She visited small villages in Sicily, walked the streets he'd walked as a young man before he came to America seeking fortune. She understood him better after that trip. He'd been a product of his time, a man who'd used criminal means to achieve the American dream, but who'd ultimately wanted to give something back. The museums that received the artwork and rare books created special exhibitions, telling the story of prohibition, organized crime, and the hidden history beneath American cities. Schools brought students to see the exhibits, learning lessons about crime and consequences, about how illegal wealth inevitably causes pain, but also about redemption and second chances. Richard Pemberton was convicted of witness tampering and served 18 months in prison. His family's reputation in the city was permanently damaged. Douglas Pemberton, the real estate agent who'd originally sold Maya the garage, lost his license and left the city in disgrace. Vincent Calabrese came out of hiding and cooperated with the FBI. In exchange for his testimony about various fraudulent schemes, he received a reduced sentence. He served 2 years and, upon release, wrote a book about his experiences. A portion of the proceeds went to Maya's foundation. The city installed a historical marker outside Maya's garage, commemorating the discovery and explaining the history of the tunnels. The tunnels themselves were sealed for safety, but detailed documentation and photographs were preserved for historical study. 5 years after she'd bought the garage for $1,000, Maya stood in front of the building once again, but now it was transformed. Rodriguez Automotive and Training Center read the professional sign. The building had been expanded, incorporating the adjacent lot she'd purchased. One side was her thriving garage business. The other side housed classrooms where young people learned mechanical skills through the Foundation's programs. Patricia joined her on the sidewalk. Quite a journey from that first day, huh? Maya smiled. I just wanted to own a garage. Instead, I stumbled into history, fought legal battles, faced down mobsters, and ended up running a foundation. It's been surreal. You handled it with grace and integrity. A lot of people would have kept everything for themselves. You chose to honor a dying man's wishes and help others. That says everything about who you are. Maya looked up at her building, at the young people visible through the windows, learning skills that would change their lives. Giovanni Morti was a criminal, but he was also human. He made terrible choices, but he tried to make amends at the end. I was just lucky enough to be in a position to help finish what he started. A young woman emerged from the building, maybe 19 years old, wearing coveralls with grease-stained hands. She reminded Maya of herself not so long ago. The young woman approached shyly. Ms. Rodriguez, I just wanted to thank you. The Foundation's scholarship program changed my life. I was working dead-end retail jobs, barely making rent. Now I'm learning a trade and I already have job offers. You gave me hope. Maya felt tears sting her eyes. This was why she'd made the choices she'd made. What's your name? Angela Martinez. I'm in the advanced engine repair class. I want to specialize in hybrid and electric vehicles. That's the future, right? Absolutely. And Angela, you don't need to thank me. You're doing the work, learning the skills. I just opened a door. You're the one walking through it. After Angela went back inside, Patricia said, That's probably the 100th person who's thanked you this year. Each one matters, Maya replied. Each person whose life is changed, each kid who gets a chance they wouldn't have had, that's Giovanni Morti's real legacy now. Not the crime, not the violence, but the lives changed for the better. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Patricia said, So, I have to ask, do you ever wonder if there's more down there? The tunnels branched off in multiple directions. Giovanni's letter mentioned multiple locations. Maya laughed. I've thought about it, but you know what? I found enough. More than enough. If there are other hidden chambers, other treasures, let them stay hidden. Some mysteries don't need to be solved. I have my garage, my foundation, and my peace of mind. That's all the treasure I need. But even as she said it, Maya couldn't help glancing at the building, thinking about the tunnels beneath. The architectural plans she'd had drawn up for the building expansion had revealed something interesting. One of the sealed tunnel branches showed signs of continuing beyond where they'd stopped exploring, and the metal detector had given faint readings from that direction. She'd mentioned it to no one, not even Patricia. Some secrets were worth keeping. Maybe someday, when the foundation was fully established and running smoothly, when her garage was successful and stable, maybe then she'd take another look at that sealed passage. Or maybe she'd leave it alone, letting the past rest in peace. That evening, after everyone had gone home, Maya descended into the preserved section of tunnel that she maintained as a private museum of sorts. She'd kept one small area unsealed, just enough to remember where she'd come from, what she'd discovered. The hidden chamber where she'd found the safe was still accessible, though empty now, its contents distributed according to law and conscience. She stood in the room, remembering the first time she'd broken through the collapsed wall, the awe and terror of discovering millions in treasure. It seemed like a lifetime ago, though it had been just 5 years. Her phone buzzed. A text from Agent Crane. Just wanted you to know we closed 3 more cold cases using information from the documents you found. Justice delayed is still justice. Thank you for your cooperation. Maya smiled and typed back, Glad I could help. That's what this was all for, right? Justice, redemption, and second chances. She took one last look around the empty room, then climbed back up to the garage. She sealed the metal door carefully, as she always did. The past was important, but the present and future mattered more. Outside, the city lights were coming on as dusk fell. Maya locked up her garage, set the security system, and headed to her apartment. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, cars to fix, students to teach, foundation business to handle. But tonight she would rest, knowing she'd taken an impossible situation and turned it into something good. As she climbed the stairs to her apartment, she thought about all the people whose lives had intersected with hers through this journey. Giovanni Morty, the criminal trying to atone. Anthony Morty, the grandson carrying a secret for decades. Richard Pemberton, the bully who'd overreached and fallen. Anthony Castellano, the mob descendant seeking his grandmother's jewelry. Vincent Calabrese, the coward who'd found courage. Patricia, the lawyer who'd believed in her. Agent Crane, the FBI agent seeking justice. And countless others. The students learning trades, the young entrepreneurs getting their start, the museum visitors learning history, the historians studying the documents, the families finding closure about stolen property. One person's discovery had rippled outward, touching hundreds of lives. Maya hadn't sought that kind of impact. She just wanted to own a garage and fix cars, but life had other plans. She reached her apartment door and paused, key in hand. Through the window she could see her modest living space, comfortable furniture, a bookshelf full of mechanical manuals, photos of family and friends on the walls. It wasn't luxurious. She could afford much better now, but she liked her life simple. The money she'd kept from the discovery sat mostly in investments, growing slowly, securing her future. She lived off her garage income, proving to herself that she could succeed on her own merits. Inside, she made dinner, nothing fancy, just pasta and salad. As she ate, she browsed her laptop, checking in on foundation business. There were applications for the next round of scholarships. She'd review them tomorrow with the foundation board. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, old habits from the chaotic days after the discovery dying hard, but something made her pick up. Ms. Rodriguez, my name is Sarah Chen. I'm a documentary filmmaker. I'd love to talk to you about making a film about your story. I think it's important that people understand what really happened, the whole story, not just the sensational headlines. Maya considered. She'd turned down dozens of such requests over the years, but maybe it was time. Maybe telling the complete story, all the complications and challenges and choices, could help other people facing their own impossible situations. Let's talk, Maya said, but I have conditions. The story has to be honest, showing the struggles as well as the successes, and any proceeds I receive go to the foundation. Sarah Chen agreed enthusiastically, and they set up a meeting. After the call, Maya sat back, thinking about how her story would be told. A woman buys a garage for $1,000, discovers a fortune, faces corruption, threats, and legal battles, and ultimately chooses integrity over greed, honoring a dead criminal's final wish to do good. It was a strange story, almost unbelievable, but it was true, all of it, and maybe that was the point. Sometimes life threw impossible situations at you. What mattered was how you responded, what choices you made when faced with temptation and pressure. Maya finished her dinner, cleaned up, and prepared for bed. Tomorrow would be busy. She had 3 cars scheduled for major repairs, a foundation board meeting, and an interview with a reporter doing a follow-up piece for the anniversary of the discovery. As she was brushing her teeth, her phone buzzed again. This time it was an email from the Geological Survey Department at the local university. The subject line read, "Underground anomaly detected near your property." Maya's heart skipped. She opened the email. A graduate student conducting a survey of old tunnel systems in the city had detected what appeared to be another chamber system approximately 50 yards from her garage, at a depth of 30 feet. The survey suggested it might connect to the tunnel system she discovered. The email continued, "We would like to request permission to conduct a more detailed investigation of this anomaly. Historical records suggest this might be part of the larger Morty tunnel network. If you're interested in participating in this investigation, please contact us. Maya stared at the email for a long moment. Another mystery, another potential discovery. She could simply ignore it, delete the email, and maintain her peaceful life. Or she could open that door again, step back into the chaos and excitement of discovery. She smiled and closed her laptop without responding. Not tonight. Maybe never. She'd found her treasure already, and it wasn't gold or jewels or paintings. It was the satisfaction of building something good, of helping others, of turning a criminal's legacy into something positive. Let the mysteries remain mysteries. Let the past keep some of its secrets. Maya had everything she needed right here in the present. She turned off the lights and climbed into bed, falling asleep with a contented smile. Outside, the city hummed with its usual nighttime sounds. Below the streets in the sealed tunnels, Giovanni Morti's secrets rested in darkness. And in her garage, young people would arrive tomorrow morning, ready to learn, to grow, to chase their own dreams. And that, Maya thought as sleep claimed her, was the real treasure all along.